Hello, everyone, or one. I think I have one person watching right now. Gordon Causey, Gordy Canuck, Grow a Set, live 11:15, exactly the time I said I was going to go live, Saturday, the 3rd of December. And I'm more or less following up on the video I did a couple nights ago. Before I get rolling, if you like, if you want to subscribe because I'm planning to do these weekly Saturdays sometime around 11 p.m. Make it a consistent thing. And if you want to share, you're welcome to share. One might ask the question, why am I doing these videos? I just want you to know my channel is not monetized. I'm not doing this for money. I'm not doing this. I'm hoping, endeavoring. Biggest thing I want to be able to do is to share some truth in a world that I think we're inundated with. In the last video, I referred to it as disinformation. And I'm going to talk a bit about that. We've heard these words a lot lately: misinformation, disinformation, and we're swimming in it in today's world. And I wanted to expand on my video from 2 nights ago. And during that video, I was basically relating my experience during the entire COVID era and how I went in with my eyes squinting, a little bit afraid, a little bit, is this really that bad? And then my eyes opened up wide in a very short period of time. And one of the big reasons I think that happened is because of something that bothered me right at the start. And I didn't say it well enough in that video of 2 nights ago, is this whole declaration of people as essential and non-essential drove me crazy. Everyone, every human being is essential. That's a big part of my faith, is that in God's eyes, everyone's essential. But in the government's eyes, they divided us. We were essential workers and non-essential workers. And I was in that category where the government said that as a military member, which I was at that time in March of 2020, I was an essential worker. I could go into work. And I talked in that video about the cognitive dissonance that goes on, the messaging at the time. If you turned on the news, on the radio, if you looked in the paper, everything was, this is a deadly virus, stay in your house. You don't want to get this thing. You got to sanitize the world and, do everything you can to avoid this virus. But you people, you so-called essential workers, you can risk getting the deadly coronavirus. It's okay. And so as one who was deemed allowed to go into work, it became quickly apparent to me that the deadly coronavirus, how about the mostly benign coronavirus? And I'll emphasize that I'm not a medical expert. I'm not a research scientist or anything of that nature. I'm just giving my own personal experience, views, opinions on what I went through starting at the beginning. And now I wasn't the only one, obviously, though. And this is another point that I failed to make in that last video. There were tons of so-called essential workers, drugstore, grocery store, gas stations. When the Ontario government brought in their lockdown measures in March of 2020, they came out with a list of workplaces, industries, where people could go to work. And that list, and I'm operating off memory, but I think I'm pretty darn close, was about 270 workplace environments in total. There were armies of workers going in and out of workplaces. Amazon warehouses were deemed essential. Television and movie production was deemed essential. So all these people were going out, but I'm still in the minority. I was still in the minority at the beginning, still, even though most people were going in and out of work. I would submit they should have looked and said, geez, this isn't the deadly coronavirus, but that most did. Most went along. And on the day that COVID was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization, I think that date was March 11th. Lockdowns hadn't yet been instituted. I believe they came in sometime around March 17th or 18th in Ontario and in most of Canada. But March 11th was the day it was declared a pandemic and a deadly pathogen. And that was the first time I learned the word epidemiology. I'd heard the word before, but it never sunk in. I never concerned myself with it too much. I thought epidemiology was some medical degree. And as it turns out, it's not, in point of fact, a medical degree in of itself. Epidemiology is the study of theories about possible ways to maybe control the spread of things like viral pathogens. It's more about mechanics than actual medicine, transmission vectors and things like that, and the potential for mitigation efforts to limit or stop spread. And, this was I don't think I'm unique in that regard. I think a lot of people had heard the word epidemiology, but had never really looked into it or cared. And that day at work on March 11th, when the pandemic was declared in my workplace, there was a gentleman by the name of Dan. And I voiced my opinions right off the bat. Oh, come on, really? Because at that point, they were suggesting limiting contact and to avoid visiting people outside your household and to sing happy birthday twice while you wash your hands, because I think they wanted 20 seconds or something, and they said a good way to make sure you're doing the time right is to sing happy birthday twice and all this insanity. And I voiced my opinion, and at that point we were scheduled to go visit someone. We were going to visit. And I was like, I'm still going. This is nuts. And a gentleman with whom I worked became quite emotional. And, said, you can't. He bought in 100% fully to this narrative. And got quite emotional with me, asked me not to please don't go. And it was insane what was happening. And I think there's a reason why, in detailing my own personal experience and, how I turned I looked at everything sideways that was coming out, and, wear a mask when standing up, but you can take it off when you sit down, and then, arrows on the floor and 6 feet, distant, 2 meter distant markers and all this stuff. And I think there's a reason why, and everyone has a unique experience. Everyone has grown up differently. Even people within the same household, their life experience is different. And there's a reason why I think, more prone to being willing to swim against the stream, to go against conventional or consensus views. And it has to do with my upbringing. I mentioned in that video of 2 nights ago that I spent time growing up in New York City, Staten Island, and then later in New Jersey. Point of fact, I did a lot of moving growing up. I went to one school for kindergarten. We lived in a town called Wyckoff, New Jersey. And then a year later, when I was starting grade 1, we moved to a neighboring town called Glen Rock, New Jersey. I was 4 or 5 years old. And when you're, changing towns at the age of 4, 5, 6 years of age, you might as well be moving to another state or province. It's a huge move. I want to stress something. I am Canadian born. We had moved down to New York City when I was somewhere around 6 months of age. But my dad worked in finance, and he was down working in the Wall Street district of New York City. So, I went to one school for kindergarten, another school for grades 1, 2, and 3, in a neighboring town. And I was in grade 4, October of grade 4, having gone through 1, 2, 3, and a month or so of school in Glen Rock, New Jersey. Then we moved again, and we moved to Burlington, Ontario, Canada. And I finished grade 4 and did all of grade 5 there. And then we moved again, and we moved to Portland, Oregon. And I did grade 6 in Portland, Oregon. And then we moved again back to Canada, where we remained. And that was, so I entered grade 7 at a different school yet again. So I did all this flipping back and forth. And I've thought about it. How did this impact me? And one area in which I do think it impacted me is this. I became accustomed to being outside of the norm. You know, in the video, I've talked about the vortex of groupthink. That's the title of this video, is escaping the vortex of groupthink. Well, when you're used to being outside of the groupthink, if you're used to being an outsider, that becomes your normal. And so just, you know, some examples. When I lived in New Jersey and going to grade 1, 2, 3 at Clary Coleman Public School, Glen Rock, your running shoes or your sneakers, whatever, that's what they were called, sneakers. You call them your sneakers. Get your sneakers on, going outside. So we, you know, and I talked. I was in New York. I was a New Jersey boy, Northern Jersey. And so you talk like this, and you talk about your sneakers and the front area. The school is called the foyer. And, you know, that's just my normal, you know. And then in grade 4, I guess I'd be 9 years old, we moved to Burlington, Ontario. And now all of a sudden I don't talk right. I talk different than everyone. And I don't call things by the right names. They're no longer your sneakers. Now they were called runners. Your teacher would say, get your runners on. What do you mean runners? Well, we're not running. You're runners. Get your runners on. And then we moved to, you know, I was there, finished grade 4 and 5. Then we moved to Portland, Oregon. And in Portland, Oregon, what had been my sneakers in New Jersey and then my runners in Burlington, all of a sudden became my tennis shoes. Put on your tennies, they would say. And so being outside of the norm, being outside of the group, became something of a normal thing for me. And I'll tell you, it's still uncomfortable. You still don't like to be the outlier. You still don't like to be swimming against the stream, because when you swim against the stream, when you run against the herd, you get beat up. But it also becomes somewhat normal. And an example I'll give, it's a bit of an unfortunate example, but many will have heard likely of women who, as children, grew up in households that were abusive. And then that woman will then, or that young girl will then grow up into a woman, and she will marry a guy, and often, too often, she will find herself with an abusive partner. And it's been put forward by smarter people than me that, you know, it's her normal. And that's why she grew up with it. And so to her, that represents normal. Even though she knows it's negative, she still gravitates toward it. And so for me, being outside the norm, even though I don't like it, even though it's not nice all the time, and even though I get a lot of blowback, I'm far more comfortable with it than others are. And there is a huge, I think, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not Dr. Jordan Peterson or anyone like that. But I think there's a huge desire on the part of people in general, children, in particular, but it continues right through your entire life, a huge need to conform and to be well thought of and well regarded. And to be outside of that groupthink and to hold views that are contrary and to express those views, that's an uncomfortable thing. And I don't think a lot of people are willing to do it. And so what happens in the COVID era is I think there were genuinely a lot of people who genuinely questioned, does this make sense? But groupthink, you had scared, frightened people tend to dominate the conversation. When someone is frightened, they are loud and they bully because they want you to confirm their fear. And so I felt bullied by people over my libertarian view. You do you, I'll do me. You want to hunker in a bunker and suck air through a mask? Fill your boots. Leave me alone. And it was an inconvenient fact that I was going to churches far and wide. Kitchener-Waterloo, Aylmer, Ontario, Peterborough, Napanee. I was traveling all over, going to a restaurant during the Vax Pass Insanity in Kingston, Ontario, and unmasked, unvaxxed. And the unfortunate, or rather the inconvenient part, was that I was and have remained a healthy individual. And that did not confirm. People would have to rush back home and turn on the nightly news to hear about some guy in Upper Bootleg, Saskatchewan, who declined the vaccine and was put into a ventilator and died. Okay, there, good. My fears have been confirmed. And this is, it's difficult to go against the stream. It's difficult to swim upstream. It's difficult to go against the herd. But unfortunately, we need more people willing to do it. And it's cost me. It's cost me relationships. And I was thinking about it a lot over the last few days. I mean, because the point of contention isn't the fact that I hold contrary views, it's that I express them. Like an example I will give is the Ottawa convoy last year. I was fully in support of the protesters, of the truckers, of those going to Ottawa to demonstrate for a restoration of Canada's Constitution and our Charter of Rights and Freedom, and the recognition of the rule of law, that Canada is a country that recognizes the rule of law and doesn't quash all over people's basic human rights. But for a large segment of the population, and this is why you see so much censorship in today's world, is because of this groupthink. The powers that be need to quash those other voices offering contrary views so that the prescribed, the approved narrative can take firm root. You'll remember early on in the pandemic, there were two doctors in Bakersfield, California, one of whom was named Dr. Erickson. They run an urgent care center in Bakersfield. They held a news conference for the local media just to give their expert opinion on everything that was going on and the damage that lockdown was doing to the population in their little area. And they cited data from Stanford University and data from around the world. And within a day or two, that video, which got uploaded to video, it wasn't originally a YouTube type broadcast. It was a little news piece, a little press conference done for the local media in Bakersfield, California. Well, it got that newscast, that press conference got uploaded to YouTube, got millions of views in a matter of days, 24, 48 hours. And then it was slammed down the memory hole and taken off. And it was labeled misinformation. Well, how can you label? Let me decide for myself whether it's misinformation. No, you're not allowed to see it. We've decided it's misinformation. You're not allowed to watch it. You can't make that determination on your own. You're not qualified. Let me see, he's talking about a study that was published by Stanford University. Oh, they did research with the LA Board of Public Health. Let me see. No, we're not allowed to talk about that. So this idea of groupthink is, I talked in the last video, I talked about all the disinformation campaigns that have gone on in my lifetime, living for the first 9-10 years of my life down in the US, and then for another year later when I was turning 11. And I was down in the United States for pretty much the entire Vietnam War era. Not the very start, but I was born in 66, and sometime late that year or early in 67, we moved to New York. And then again, we made our way over to New Jersey. And we didn't move back to Canada until 75, which is when the Vietnam War ended. And the disinformation campaign put out by the US government at that time was, and I spoke about this, was this whole domino effect, or the domino theory, that if South Vietnam was allowed to fall to the communist north, that the rest of Southeast Asia would, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Korea, all these countries are going to tip. It's the domino effect. And it was garbage. It was just a lie used to justify the war. And then there was the lie in the first Gulf War of the early 90s, after Iraq had invaded Kuwait, and the George H.W. Bush administration hired a PR firm, a public relation firm, and they came up with this idea to have a young girl who was a member of the Kuwaiti royal family, 12 years old, I think, and she addressed a joint session of Congress in the United States, and she told the sitting members of Congress and the world, because it was televised, that Iraqi soldiers were throwing babies out of incubators. And that was simply a case of, that was the invention of a public relations firm in an effort to sell the war to Americans and to people around the world. And of course, back then you didn't know it was the invention of a public relation it wasn't that it was part of an advertising campaign. But we use these words, misinformation, disinformation, and they're soft words. I'm a big fan of George Carlin. I almost think I would call George Carlin almost a prophet in a sense. I would call him the world's great secular prophet. And he had an enormous gift for language, and he would talk in his comedic routines about soft language, how we soften language to make harsh reality more palatable. And so after World War II, we learned about propaganda. Propaganda was evil. Propaganda was lying. And it's a harsh sounding word, hard consonant sounds, propaganda. You're falling for propaganda. But when we engaged in it, when US government and other Western nations engaged in it, it wasn't propaganda. Well, it's disinformation. Well, isn't that propaganda? No, it's not propaganda. It's disinformation. Sounds nicer. It's easier to, accept. Well, it's not propaganda. It's just disinformation. And the end result is the same. You're being lied to and you're being manipulated with either one. But propaganda is a harsh sounding word. Disinformation, sounds like a nice tasty cake you might want to eat. You wouldn't want to touch that propaganda, but disinformation is okay. But they're the same thing. And in that last video I outlined, then there was the disinformation propaganda about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction used to justify the second Gulf War, which happened under the George W. Bush administration. His dad, George H.W. Herbert Walker Bush, his administration gave us the weapons of mass destruction, the babies being thrown out of incubators propaganda. And then his son, George W. Bush's administration, gave us the weapons of mass destruction propaganda. But of course, without that, would they have been able to justify the war? Would they have been able to get what they called the coalition of the willing? Would they have gotten public support? A lot of people are of the opinion that the Vietnam War only came to an end and that's something to remember again about the Vietnam War era. Members of Richard Milhous Nixon's administration have subsequently admitted that they engaged in propaganda. They wanted to associate all the kids protesting against the war, well, they're just a bunch of drug-addled hippies. And I forget the member of the administration, but it's a widely shared quote and is journalistically verifiable, said, "Did we know we were lying to the American people? Yes." And that's what propaganda is. It's lies meant to achieve an end. And I think where the disinformation label comes in is that people think that if the end that is being pursued is viewed as beneficial, well, then if it requires lying, propagandizing, disinformation, if it requires that, well, the end justifies the means. Whereas that's misinformation, disinformation. Well, the end justifies the means, so it's okay. When it's propaganda, the end doesn't justify the means. So it's not a thought that I've worked through fully 100%. I label these videos live and unscripted, and that's what they are. So I think a big part of the reason why I'm willing to be vocal about what's going on and to call things out is simply because it's my normal, and it's been my lifelong normal. I'm used to it. It doesn't bother me when people say, "Oh, you're crazy." Of course, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Are you a military intelligence expert? They proved it on the nightly news. Colin Powell went before the UN. He showed video evidence proving that they had it. So what do you know? Okay. Where were they? How come they never got found? All the U.S. found at the end of the day, after they had invaded and taken over Iraq and gotten control of the oil fields, shut down their oil exchange bursary, and achieved all the ends that were the genuine reasons behind that war. After they did that, all they found were some inert, meaning dead, inactive, useless steel drums of sarin gas. And the U.S. already knew that Iraq had those drums of sarin gas because it was the United States that had supplied them to Iraq, because Iraq had been an ally when Saddam Hussein went to war against Iran for 7-8 years, and in a war that basically ended in a stalemate. The old Soviet Union had backed Iran, and the United States backed Iraq. And it was basically, I refer to it as a proxy war. It was war between the United States and the old Soviet Union, but rather than fighting directly themselves, they got each took an ally and had them go at it. But I'm digressing. There are some other things I wanted to cover. One, and a few people have noted this, and they're bang on. Trudeau has been in the news recently, voicing his support for protesters in China who were demonstrating against lockdown measures. The same Trudeau who propagandized Canadians through a compliant media into getting a large chunk of Canadians to believe that the Ottawa protest was an illegal occupation. You heard that all the time. This is an illegal occupation. It was never an illegal occupation. It was a demonstration. It was something that is allowed under Canada's Constitution and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Those are public grounds. Parliament Hill is public. It's our nation's capital. Where are you supposed to go to protest? If you're protesting actions being taken by the federal government denying Canadians their right to bodily autonomy over whether or not someone deciding whether or not to take an injection of a substance that had no long-term safety profile. Zero, none. And it's illegal. Canada's a signatory to international agreements, making it illegal to coerce an individual into taking any type of medical procedure, including a jab. And yet our government violated the very agreements to which it is a signatory and engaged in coercion on steroids. If you don't take it, you cannot work for the government. You cannot get on a plane. You cannot get on a train. You're a racist, misogynist, and you hold unacceptable views. There are only certain acceptable views in this Reich we call Canada. You must think this way. You must act this way, or you are a fringe minority and you are unacceptable. And we will not tolerate you. That was our prime minister. Omar Khadr was a child soldier taken over at a very young age to Afghanistan. He was supporting a regime as a child, taken there by his father. And so it's fair, I think, to say that he was at war with his own country. Omar Khadr was born in Canada. He's a Canadian-born citizen. His dad took him over to Afghanistan, and he was on the side of the forces with which Canada was at war. We were at war, and Omar Khadr was supporting an enemy. However, Canada is a signatory to international agreements, one of which is UN Declaration on the Rights of the Child. And a child, by definition, is anyone 17 years of age or younger. And at the time when Omar Khadr was captured, I believe he was 14 years of age, maybe 15. I think he was actually just before his 15th birthday. It's like a grade 9 student, just to put it into perspective. And according to international agreements to which Canada is a signatory, he is not to be jailed. He's a child. And what happened to him? We all know he went into Guantanamo Bay. It's widely believed he was tortured, sleep deprived, all manners of torture. There are all kinds of allegations about the torture that went on in Guantanamo Bay. And Canada abrogated his constitutional rights. His rights as a Canadian citizen were abrogated. They were ignored. Now, you can agree with that or you can disagree with that, but you can't disagree with the fact that those are the laws, and Canada as a nation did not afford Omar Khadr, that individual, the protections that our Constitution gives him. And so Omar Khadr was suing the Canadian government, and expert legal opinion from all sides was that he was going to win. He was going to win that court case, and he probably would have been awarded somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $20 million. And so the government of Canada cut a deal. They plea bargained. Omar Khadr agreed to drop the lawsuit, and the Canadian government paid him $10 million. Justin Trudeau stood up for the constitutional rights and charter rights of Omar Khadr. Unpopular as it was, he stood on the rule of law. But in the Ottawa protest, he trashed the rights, freedoms, they're not privileges. These are supposed to be rights. We found out that they have become privileges because privileges can be taken away. He started to treat our inalienable God-given rights as privileges. Well, you don't get those anymore because I don't like your views. You're a racist. You're a misogynist. You're this. You're that. Name calling, hate speech is what our prime minister was engaging in. But now that it's the Chinese citizens who are protesting against their government and the imposition of lockdown measures, now Trudeau says that citizens have the right to protest. Yeah, Chinese citizens have the right to protest the Chinese government, but Canadian citizens don't have the right to protest against their government taking away their constitutional and charter rights. I could go down another rabbit hole. There is reporting coming out, and that is saying that Justin Trudeau and the Prime Minister's office, the PMO, that they're directing members of Parliament, Liberal members of Parliament, to be election ready for the spring, to start raising money, to get their campaign teams in order and the machinery involved in running for re-election. I find this very surprising and a little unsettling in a fashion. I know everyone, those of us who would love to see someone like Pierre Poilievre or maybe Maxime Bernier as who are more of a conservative mind, are chomping at the bit for there to be an election because they're convinced Trudeau will lose. And all the polling right now indicates that it's a dead heat between the Conservatives and the Liberals. I think they're both polling in and around 34-35%. And the difference is less than the margin of error in the polling. It's a statistical tie, which means if the polling is to be believed, at best, Trudeau could hope to win what he already has, which is a workable minority government with the NDP propping him up. So, but if these stories are true, that the PMO, that the Prime Minister's office is directing liberal members of Parliament to be election ready, then if this is true, and if there is indeed plans to have a springtime election in Canada, it makes me wonder. Trudeau is very connected. He's part of this World Economic Forum's Young Leadership Program. He's almost their protege. He's their poster kid. And the World Economic Forum has partnerships with major corporations, with big tech. They control, going back to an old George Carlin routine, they control all the news and information. And so is something coming down the pipe? Is something envisioned that will vault, that they can manipulate the Canadian population or a significant enough portion of them to vault Trudeau back into majority status? Open question. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. So, thing is, and I've said this before, this whole great reset agenda that we're living under, Klaus Schwab was addressing the G7 or G20. I forget whether it was G7 or G20. These are it must have been the G20 because it was held in Indonesia and Bali. The 20 largest economies in the world all send their prime ministers, presidents, finance ministers, representatives, and they discuss issues of global importance. And Klaus Schwab addressed it, which is curious because Klaus Schwab isn't from any country specific. He doesn't represent he's not an elected official for any country. And yet he was given a podium, he was given a platform. He was standing at the podium at the G20, and he was referring to us being in this great reset, that we are in the transitionary phase. We are transitioning from the old system that we had prior to 2019 and years prior, and that, with the help of COVID, this was their opportunity. Trudeau said as much in an address to the UN in September of 2020. This is our opportunity, that we are in the transitionary phase to this surveillance state. And it's an unsettling time. There's just touching on some other things that are in the news right now. There is a couple in New Zealand who have a very young child, infant, who has a heart condition of some description that requires an operation. And the parents are adamant that they want any blood used, any transfusions, any blood that is given to their child, they want it to come from donors who have been unjabbed. And the New Zealand government at least the health officials within New Zealand are telling them they don't get the right to make that decision. From what I understand, the parents have done all the legwork and they have the donors lined up, so the supply isn't an issue. They vetted a number of donors willing to supply unjabbed blood. And so it's 100% absolutely feasible to do this. But the New Zealand authorities, the medical authorities, are not permitting it. And it's before the courts as we speak, at least as far as I know. I don't think there's been resolution on it yet. I believe it is currently before the courts. And I had one last little note I was just reading here. If anyone wants to chime in, I see I've had people come in. If you want to say hi, tell me where you're from, engage somewhat, tell me your opinion on anything I've said. If you think you can agree, disagree, you can think I'm crazy, I don't care. But I had written down jab status question. And I don't know what I was referring to when I made that note. I've talked about just about everything I've wanted to talk about for this week's episode. I'll do this again Saturday of next week. And again, it'll be sometime around 11:15, somewhere between 11 p.m. and midnight Eastern Standard Time. But I enjoy these things. It helps me work through what I'm thinking, and gives me a forum, if you will. As I say, you're welcome to like, share, subscribe. It's not monetized. I don't know if you can check that. Maybe someone can tell me whether or not can you look and see whether a channel is monetized or not. I don't even know how to monetize, and I don't care. But anyway. Freaky world that we're living in, and the hardest thing to get through is there's a veneer of normalcy going on. I mean, the Raptors are playing basketball, the Leafs are playing hockey, the World Cups is going on wherever it's happening. I'm not following NBA, NHL, or the World Cup, although it's background noise. I can't avoid it completely. So there's this veneer that everything is back to normal. This is the new normal, and it's not that much. We still have our hockey, we still have our sports. The stock market's still getting reported on. People are moving, people are changing jobs. I mean, we haven't devolved into this authoritarian state that so many conspiracy theorists have been telling us is coming, that we're going to have a social credit score and all this. And all I will say is that, as said by Klaus Schwab, I'm listening to him. He said this is a transitionary phase. We're moving toward that. but we're in the transitionary phase. And I finally remembered what it is I was talking about. A video dropped, and I think it's called Action Canada. Has a video out, but it's on RUMBLE. I'm not sure if you're allowed to say that name. And it's with Dr. Peter McCullough. That should be a name well known to many people. I believe he's a cardiologist, board certified cardiologist, and I believe he's the most published cardiologist, in U.S. history, and perhaps the most published cardiologist in world history. And he did this video with this Action for Canada or Action Canada group. And a topic came up, and it was on shedding, which is something anyone who's had their eyes open, this debate over shedding has been around for a while. And people have asked the question that, do the jabbed, do they shed? Do they shed spike proteins, or do they shed the virus, or, onto other people? And I had always been not expert, not giving advice, and all the other disclaimers for the community standards people. Listen to public health. They want you to be terrified and go get booster number 5 or 6 or whatever number it is. So listen to public health. He was saying that, what I was saying is, I never believed in shedding. I didn't think it was anything that was real. And he is saying that the exchange of bodily fluids between the jabbed and the unjabbed could result in the exchange of mRNA, the mRNA. mRNA, messenger RNA. Basically, from what I understand, it's basically instructions telling your body how to create the toxic spike protein on the surface of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And that's freaky. I'm not concerned to the extent that my household is unjabbed. So the potential for me to be exchanging bodily fluids with a jabbed person are beyond small, microscopic, but it's got to be a concern. Imagine a younger person, 20-ish or whatever, who is young and single in today's very permissive world and is unjabbed. Is that person risking becoming, I would put it down, jabbed by proxy through having relations? For example, even Dr. McCullough mentioned kissing, something as simple as kissing, because that's an exchange of bodily fluids. My degree in virology and immunology and every other medical science, all my degrees are from the internet. What do I know? So I'll defer to Dr. McCullough, one of the most published and maybe the most published cardiologist in world history. A guy who's addressed the U.S. Congress and numerous state legislatures. The guy's a lion. I think he's getting a little full of himself, to be honest. I don't mean to be unkind, but during that interview, there are 2 versions of it available. You can just watch one on this shedding aspect, and that one's around 3 minutes long. But the entire interview is well over an hour. I think it's like an hour and a half. And I've watched about 40, 50 minutes of it. I still have 30, 40 minutes worth of that video to watch. It's very long. But he talks about how he has more, he's trending higher than Donald Trump or Elon Musk. And, how he was on a podcast that he's Joe Rogan's number one. When he goes on Joe Rogan's podcast, that his viewership he has the highest numbers of everyone. Well, who cares? It just sounds a little self-serving when he does that. I've had the same issue with Dr. Robert. I'm not disparaging anything that Peter McCulloch says. It's just, it creates this impression that the motivation behind this is I can't even say the word properly, grandiosement or agrandiosement. I'm not exactly sure how you say it. I read a lot of words and don't have a chance to say them, so I'm not always sure how things are exactly pronounced. But I had the same issue with Dr. Robert Malone, who, as I understand it, when he was working at the Salk Institute, SALK, one of the world's leading research facilities, you've got to be super, super smart and highly accomplished and accredited to work at a place like the Salk Institute. And he worked there and on the development of mRNA and DNA vaccines. And as I understand it, he has 7 or 8 patents related to mRNA vaccine technology. And I put it down somewhat to academic pride. He wants acknowledgement for that which he's accomplished, and I get that. But a lot of people will say he is the definitive article, the inventor of mRNA vaccines. And I think that pushes things too far, and it makes it sound like he's trying to, build himself. Oh, I'm better than everyone else. And I think that diminishes the strength of his message. I do think he should be credited as an inventor. He contributed toward the invention of this mRNA technology, whether you want to consider that to be a positive thing or a negative thing, take it as you will. But I think the biggest thing is we need to get the truth out, and we need people willing to talk. And this kind of forum, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, whatever, is not the same as face-to-face personal interaction with your family groups, peer groups, because this groupthink, this vortex, the reason propaganda is used is because it waters, it fertilizes the lies, and then the lies grow. Safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, thoroughly tested, safe and effective. And asking a perfectly reasonable question gets you laughed at. And the perfectly reasonable question in terms of countering this thoroughly tested, safe and effective nonsense is there was no standalone phase 1 safety trial done. And the trial that was done, the phase 1, 2, 3 combined on the original jabs, if you look at Pfizer, their estimated study completion date is in March of 2023. And I believe that's going to be pushed back even further. Just hasn't been updated on the clinicaltrials.gov site, the US regulatory repository, where all clinical trials have their information up, where you can read about the trial design, how many enrollees, when it's starting, when it's finishing. All that information is up at clinicaltrials.gov. And I believe that the trial that Pfizer is running, because it's still going, for the original jabs, right now that website says that their estimated study completion date is in March of 2023, so we're still several months away. Well, that's easily verifiable information from reputable government sources. But because of groupthink and because of propaganda, safe and effective, thoroughly tested, simple verifiable fact gets laughed at. Oh yeah, sure. And you get gaslit. And it happens all the time. They'll say, oh, you know more. You know more. I listen to the guy in the news. Yeah, but you know better, eh? I'll end this with one last little thought. don't tell people you've done research. I try to avoid using the word research. Because a lot of people like to say, well, I did my research. So why didn't you get the shot? Well, I did my research. Oh, you did the research. We may have seen there's a meme that goes around about someone sitting on a toilet with their cell phone, and it says, here's someone doing their research. I've done no research. Research is something, in my view, that takes place in a clinical setting like a laboratory. That's where research is conducted. What I'm doing is I'm reading. And I'm reading research. I'm reading what researchers have published, have put out, articles, news, and videos and such, information being put out by those who've conducted actual research. I'm not doing research myself. I'm not qualified. The differentiator, the difference between myself and others, is that as opposed to that video of those two doctors in Bakersfield, California, I seeked it out, and I found that there are always copies available of things. No, I shouldn't say always, but typically when something gets taken down and is censored, typically there are other websites and stuff. You can find this stuff, and you can find that original video that they put out. The main thing that the purpose behind the censorship and the propaganda is to silence those voices as much as possible. I don't think you can ever eliminate their voices completely, but the majority of the population is going to default to what they hear on the nightly news or what they read in the newspaper or online from an ABC, NBC, CBS, CBC, CTV, global news here in Canada. So if you can control what's on the mainstream, you don't have to worry. So rather than saying I did my research, well, what I did is I looked at the researchers on both sides of the equation. I listened to the mainstream narrative, and I listened to research coming from individuals who are silenced, censored, deplatformed, highly accredited individuals like Dr. Geert Vanden Bossche, who I've spoken of before, one of the world's leading experts on vaccines, who spoke at international conferences far and wide. Do I know if he's right or wrong? Well, when I look at the mainstream, the ones that are allowed to talk, when I listen to the Anthony Fauci's, Dr. Theresa Tam, Dr. Bonnie Henry, all these public health officials, and Pfizer and their spokespeople, well, they've been wrong more than they've been right. So how many times do they have to be wrong before you stop listening? Dr. Geert Vanden Bossche, he predicted that there would be the outbreak of a highly transmissible variant. Well, the experts that were allowed to speak, they were saying that this will provide long-lasting, durable, sterilizing immunity. And then you have this other guy, Dr. Geert Vanden Bossche, and Dr. Luc Montagnier, a Nobel Prize winner, who said this is going to make things worse. We're going to have a variant emerge because of evolutionary pressure being put on the virus that's going to blow things up even bigger, and we're going to have a variant come along that's highly transmissible. No, that's wrong. You're fear mongering. You're completely out to lunch, so said government approved experts, and yet it was the Geert Vanden Bossches and the Dr. Luc Montagniers of the world who were right. So who am I going to listen to going forward? I'll be more inclined to listen to I can't listen to Dr. Luc Montagnier anymore. He passed away. I think he was 89 years of age, Nobel Prize winning virologist from France. But Dr. Geert Vanden Bossche is still alive, and he has a website. I talked about it in a previous video. Look back. I've yammered on far too long. I've had people coming in and out. I see I already have a thumb up. Thank you. If you want to give me a like, if you want to give a share, if you want to subscribe. As I say, I'm going to be doing these Saturdays around 11 p.m., sometime between 11 and midnight, Saturday nights. And if something happens, if there's a big event or something that I just want to get off my chest, I might do one. I don't want to do any more than 2 a week. So Saturday will be fixed. And then if there's a big event or if there's something big on my mind, I'll do one during the week sometime. So God bless. And thanks for watching. And we'll see you next week, or maybe a little sooner, depending on how the week goes. I know.